All right. Welcome to all the participants. Can you please keep yourself muted during the session? If you have any queries or comments, you can type them down in the chat box or raise your hands towards the end of the session. And also keep your cameras switched on, except for all the panelists. All right. Now we'll start the session. A very delightful morning to one and all. I am Srushti Chipde, founder of TDN, and I welcome you all to today's discussion on the topic Science Through a Filmmaker's Lens. A few years ago, I watched a Bollywood movie, Mission Mangal, based on India's first interplanetary expedition Mars orbiter mission. It really helped me connect with the scientists as humans, and I was absolutely in awe of their work. And even more recently, I watched the movie The Theory of Everything, based on Stephen Hawking's life. As I saw him talk passionately about his work, I was inspired to go back and read his book, A Brief History of Time, knowing the hardships that he had gone through while writing the book and yet being able to put together the top-notch ideas and insights. In order to share this excitement with you all, we are very honored to have an esteemed panel of guests today to explore the impact of filmmaking on science storytelling and vice versa. I would like to welcome Dr. V Venkateshwaran, scientist and division head, Science Communication Training at Vigyan Prasad, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. He is interested in history of science and has done several science communication audio shows. Next, I welcome Mr. Vivek Kannadi, Senior Technical Officer, Science Media Center, IISER Pune.
Okay.
Of his career as a feature filmmaker and is deeply connected to science through his passion of filmmaking. We also have Dr. Sara Iqbal. She received her PhD in biochemistry from Oxford University, UK, and did a postdoc research stint at the Scripps Research Institute in the US. She is currently Science Communications and Public Engagement Consultant. We also have the honor to have Dr. Alex Danis. She has her PhD in genetics from Stanford University, and she's a very popular YouTuber, also the owner of Helicase Media Center. We also will have a special guest and Mr. Rohan Ranganathan, and we'll welcome him as he comes into the session. Now, I guess without any further delay, I'd like the panel to present their opening remarks, starting with Dr. TVV. So please.
Yeah, okay. About 5 to 7 minutes. Is that what we are looking at initially?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good. Excellent. So the title for which we have gathered here is about science through the lens of filmmaker. As part of Vigyan Prasad, we produce a popular science television program on many areas, many subjects. And I have also conducted for almost 3 to 4 years weekly conversation with the Indian scientists to highlight what kind of research is happening in India. So I'm going to use both of them and share some of my thoughts. Maybe I'll just use my presentation just to highlight some key issues. So let me share my presentation. That will help us. Okay. I hope we are able to see my presentation. Don't worry, I'm not going to run through all the presentation. I know there is only about 7 minutes. So some of the important things. So when we are looking at making a science film for popular audience, it's important that it's not an institutional film. It's not just a press handout. It should be addressing layperson. There should be some kind of infotainment. I mean, presenting science alone, I think may not catch audience attention. So we need to make it in some way infotainment. We have to add elements for that, so that the watching this film, also a science film, will not look like a pedagogic activity, but a cultural activity that we are all engaged in, right? I mean, we read stuff, newspaper, we read novels, we read non-fiction. So it's the same kind of effect that it should attempt to give, rather than pedagogic. There might be a need for a pedagogic films. That's a very different genre altogether. I mean, we should not confuse films made for classroom purposes or for module purposes. They are all different. When we're talking about the layperson, the element of infotainment is very important. Info and attainment, both are important. We have to have balance creativity with accuracy. We may want to, as a communicator, creatively tell something, but it should not create inaccuracy in the minds of people. Similarly, we need to balance information with entertainment. Imagination and a tight framework. Okay, as a storyteller, we want to bring in many elements. I mean, maybe just I'll take a digression here to give a real life example. I'm right now trying to develop let's say, base work for fusion research, fusion, thermonuclear fusion. There is a huge project ITER coming up in France. So I want to, I'm working on that. So when I was looking through materials, what I found was till about 1960s, the research in thermonuclear fusion was classified. So much so, all the institutions which were doing thermonuclear research were given fake names. It was not reflecting the work that they were doing. For example, in Soviet Union, the institution was called as Institution for Measuring Instruments. And in England, it was called as Tube Alloys, as if it's like a factory where they are making some tubes, right? So, but how far I can imaginatively use this when I have to tell the story? How far I will go into this and then, let's say, talk about fusion, because we have only so much of time, right? So somewhere the imagination, very interesting, exciting thing that we are able to detect, and the tight framework, we need to carefully balance. If I present in this, I just, the name just slips me, maybe old age. One soldier who had studied only up to 8th grade in Soviet Army, wrote a letter to the Central Committee of Communist Party of Soviet Union, saying that I have the secret for making fusion. Then somebody came and met him, and then he gave the he wrote a proposal of how actually fusion can be achieved. And in fact, the tokamak that the ITER is now building is partly based on that person's work. Okay, later, of course, he became part of the research team and so on and so forth. So how much of this kind of exciting history, how much of the science that you want to say, how much of impact of that science you want to say, we need to balance, because we have only a tight framework. I mean, you can't just go on and go on and go on, right? In modern times, I mean, you need to keep it within some limit. So that's one balance important thing. Usually in journalism, we say that when in doubt, leave it out. But in science journalism, that's bad. That's worse. It's a job of science journalism. In fact, it's an important duty of science journalism. When in doubt, find out. And find out from correct sources, not just WhatsApp universities or the first two website that comes in Google search. Spend some time, understand. If we cannot understand, our audience won't understand what we come in. So that needs to be a bit of extra work, I would say. Maybe I'm just saying it because I am a science journalist and I want to project myself as something very extraordinary. But this fact reminds that in science journalism you need to do little bit. You have to walk a bit more than otherwise. That's, I think, important issue. So which essentially means you need to understand what you want to communicate. You have to read through the lines, and you have to also break down so that you can flesh out the most important and then piece a story which is captivating, which is communicating, which gives a sense of knowing something about what is going around to your audience. In this, I want to add only one, and then I will stop, because I think my 5 minutes, 7 minutes should be over by this time. When we talk about science communication, there is one tendency, which is to just pack information and just give it. I think most important point of a science communication is, how do I know it? Why should I believe it? That is the heart of science. If we are able to even give a sense of this particular aspect, that is the rationality, the appeal to rationality part of our communication, I think we will do a good job of science communication. I think in film and whatever means, but of course we are talking about films here. That's what. Initially, I will stop here. Maybe other points we can take up later when we discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You beautifully summed up the essence of science communication in your remarks. Thank you for that. And next up, can we have the opening remarks from Dr. Sara Iqbal?
Sure. Thanks again, Srushti, for inviting me to this event, to this discussion. I mean, I'm virtually sitting with the stalwarts in filmmaking and audiovisual medium. I have really done nothing to be talking about it, but I think I will speak more as a consumer. I think I am the person everyone else here is making films for. And I think because I absolutely love films, I love the audiovisual medium. I am a very visual person, so I love great stories, and especially if stories can be told beautifully through films. I think that's a really powerful medium, and it's because films can take me to a place and time that I'm unfamiliar with, or it helps me experience emotions that I've not experienced before, or it helps me to think about issues or ideas that I have never thought about before, or I've never thought about them in the way that film is trying to convey to me. So I think films are a very powerful medium that work by eliciting or heightening some sort of emotion in you. That could be a positive emotion of happiness, or a sense of wonder, surprise, hope, anticipation, whatever. Or it could also elicit a negative emotion, such as anger, fear, disgust, or sadness. So I think films really work, or any sort of visual, audiovisual kind of storytelling really works by hooking you on through that kind of emotional chord. So, and we have seen, I mean, we know there's enough research to tell us that films have had huge influence on people, on popular culture, on on society at large. So I guess their usefulness or for science communication, or their usefulness for embedding science in popular culture, cannot be overlooked or understated. And there are so many films that have had huge influence on me. There's so many that I don't think I'll be able to really list them out here. But I remember the first film that I thought was really interesting and that kind of struck some sort of a chord with me was this film called Cool Runnings. And I think it was, of course, it was also, there was some racial undertones that it was criticized for, but it was really a film of these Jamaican bobsled team. It was the first ever Jamaican bobsled team that qualified for Winter Olympics. And I was just blown away by the perseverance and that kind of commitment and teamwork and all the ups and downs that the characters in the film faced. And so for me as a 8 or 9 year old, I don't know, there was something about that film that has stayed with me. I've never watched it again since then, but it was definitely a film that made an impression. And similarly, I mean, after that, there've been so many science themed films. I think the most recently being Don't Look Up, which I think is a brilliant, satire and a really, really interesting film that brings to the fore so many of the scientific issues that people like you and me who are in the scientific space talk about. I think And what we saw last year during the pandemic, the kind of challenges that scientists and the scientific voice had to deal with, had to face. So there's so many really good films. I think um, one has to really think of the format very carefully. I mean, are you making a feature film? Are you looking at a documentary? I think the OTT space is really blowing up in our country, in India. And so I think maybe a lot more science content, science-based content can be seen there. But I don't think we can really throw in science in, in whatever we want to, or, shove down science down people's throat. I think it has to be melded very carefully with culture and history and human emotions and everything else. And I think good stories should be written, and good stories should be told that have a backbone of science, or that kind of enmeshes science. So yeah, so I think I think I cannot emphasize enough on how important films are and how important they are. I don't think we've really leveraged this medium enough in our country in India, and to really talk about science, to bring science to the popular culture. And so I think there's a lot that can be done in the times to come. And yeah, I would love to hear what the other panelists and the speakers are doing in this space in the times to come. And yeah, and I think there was one question about that you had asked about how do you since there's so much content out there, how do you figure out what's the right content for you? And I think for me, it's not so much, I think I usually go through word of mouth, and also reviews on social media. I constantly keep an eye out on interesting films that are coming out, or interesting recommendations that people have. So I'm not on YouTube or Netflix and Amazon going through all the films all the time. I think that would not be good use of my time. So yeah, so I usually go through like my friends or acquaintances telling me, this is a good film, you must watch it, or reviews that I come across in the media. And yeah, I will share some of the films in the chat box. Anil, I'll share them in just a bit. In fact, a very nice film that when I was at India Alliance, we had commissioned, or rather given a grant for, is this film called Written Out of History, Forgotten Indian Scientists. And it's actually a story of 3 scientists from India that I think a lot of us, even though we are in science, have not really heard too much about. We may be familiar with their work, with their scientific contributions, but not so much about, the times that they operated in and the kind of challenges they faced and how those challenges are still relevant today. And so those 3 stories are just so brilliantly captured by Munmun Dhalaria, who's a filmmaker who kind of created these films in collaboration with Minhaj Sirajuddin, who's a scientist at INSTEM. So I would also, I'll drop the link of that film. It's on YouTube. It's a short film, just 30 minutes long. And it's really, really well made. And I hope we can make many such films of Indian science and of Indian scientists, so that people get to know there's so much that has happened in India and continues to happen in the space of science and technology. And I hope we can, really take those stories out to the public at large. So that's all from me. Thanks, Srushti.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iqbal. I completely agree with you on that. Films actually allow us to personally connect with stories in science that we might otherwise be ignorant to. So it is indeed a very powerful media. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Kannadi to present his opening remarks.
Thank you, Srushti. And I'm so happy to be part of the panel. I have only 2 things to say. One is, I see and I show. This is what I heard from one of my teacher, Chaudhary, a cinematographer, where it's very simple, whether it is science, whether it is anything, an art form, so simple. Just see it and show it. So how do you see it? Seeing is like you have to imagine. Even a scientist, if they want to do great science, they have to imagine and see what could be the result. And he had to produce it by his hard work. So same thing with film or building a house or anything, what you do in life. So if you don't see it, it's difficult to build because you have not seen it. So that seeing, I don't know whether I have seen it well, but if my film is not good, that means I have not seen it properly. If you like a movie very much, like what Sarah has told, many movies which Sarah has suggested, she likes it because they have seen it and they were able to show it to you. So, I mean, people who are sitting here, they are all, extremely good at their area of expertise. And how did I connect with film? I did my BSc and MSc in electronic media, so I had my relatives, some of them are into filmmaking, lyrics writing and other things. So that's how I got into filmmaking. And I could work with some of the greatest people in India, like Jairaj. He's a multi-time national award winner. And that is how I get into film. And how I get into science filmmaking is, I was asked to do a film for water harvesting project, Marappulima at Kerala, Thrissur. And I just got a message from my friend Ashwin, who has connected to them. And it was my beginning time where they have taken me to several places where they have done this project where thousands of wells has been recharged through this one. We have collected all the information from all around the places, and whether I was not very sure whether I have seen it properly, but it was an amazing film where people can know how this is done, where technically or I don't know, but it's an amazing project where we could together, Jose Rafael and others together, could see how it should be, and we were able to do a good job of it. So see and show it. So seeing will include imagination plus doing research, writing scripts, and where you make sure that what I want to show is perfect. And this is the same case with an artist, where if you want to do a drawing or a design, he have to see make a rough sketch. If it is an animator, he will do a storyboard or in betweens. Then then they will go into final animations. So similarly in film, where we have to do a lot of research, study about the topic, understand it, put them together, and analyze. Ask yourself why I'm doing it. Do I need to tell the story? Is it so important, or I'm telling it the right way? You can ask some of your friends, or the best friend you have is you yourself, where you can ask yourself, say whether it is good or not, or why I'm making it. Then finally you get into a good shape. And I'm not sure whether I'm not in the time, but part of my work, where I have collaborated with TVV earlier, and we have conducted workshops on science communication, writing, especially writing. TVV used to take, and he used to tell beautiful stories, and I really like his stories. And NCSTC has given us some fund to conduct workshops, and the most recent filmmaking workshop we did was during the first round of pandemic. After that, it was a little break. There, we couldn't believe ourselves. We got 1,000 applicants, and out of it, 250 people were regular, and 150 films were made. It was a great experience. I hope to see more filmmakers, more to communicate through film. And I can, whether we have a poll, I'm not sure. I can ask something very simple. How do you perceive, or how do you understand things? Srushti, do we have a poll or something, or I'm not sure whether there is.
Sure, sir. The participants can either write their comments in the chat box.
So So I mean, I can give you the clue that we understand anything and everything through our five senses. There is no other option for us to learn. So, I mean, we say sixth sense, but I don't know. I have not one. I do not have one. So these five senses, how do you perceive? How much percentage for seeing or like vision? And what is the percentage for audio? And what is the percentage for touch, smell, and taste? I'm not sure whether I have access to chat. One second. Okay, anyway, I could see a response. Okay, somebody has. Okay, that's Abbas has told that perception can be affected because of the whatever you have seen. But I'm asking very simply, like roughly. Maybe I can go ahead with it. Where there is one book on advertising basics by Gulanila, where he says for hearing it is 75%, for audio it is 13%, and touch and touch is 6%, smell and taste it is 6% each, I think. So it is total 100. Out of it, 83% of our understanding is through visual as well as audio, which means 88% of whatever we learn is through our vision and audio. So that way, I mean, we can know how important a medium like film is and what it can make changes to the perception of people. I think I'll stop it here. I don't know whether I have taken too much time. Srushti.
Thank you so much, Vivek sir. Your story is especially inspiring in that you were able to capture the excitement of science through your filmmaker's lens and not the other way around, which is unusual and thus very, very inspiring. So thank you so much for your insights. And now we'd like to...
for all of you, see and show.
Yep. Thank you so much, sir. And now we'd like to hear from Dr. Alex Danis.
Thank you so much, Srushti. And thank you for having me. I am very excited to talk with you all. So my path to science communication and sort of my connection with film comes from the fact that I really couldn't decide for a long time if I wanted to be a filmmaker or a scientist. So I went to school for both. I ended up getting a PhD in genetics and have been very thankful and grateful to be able to carve out a career as a science communicator. And a lot of the work that I do, all the work that I do is freelance, sometimes with larger companies, sometimes just for myself. But a lot of the work that I do is through social media. So the films that I make show up on YouTube or sometimes on places like Instagram or TikTok. And so I think a lot about sort of why I'm using a visual media in those places. And a lot of it actually comes down to what Dr. Iqbal mentioned about the sort of ability of film to create emotion in people and to sort of get across personality. So for a lot of the work that I'm doing, because my background is in genetics, I'm often trying to get across biology things or genetic things, but I'm thinking a lot about how I create a connection with the audience and give them something that will be useful in their lives. So for me, you know, just making a video where I list a bunch of facts isn't going to be very interesting or helpful to someone and really isn't what would resonate with me. So when I think about, you know, one of the questions asked was to think about a piece of media, science media that has really resonated with me. And perhaps it's a bit of a silly example, but I thought of a video from Smarter Every Day, which is a popular YouTube channel, where he talks about why in an airplane you should put your oxygen mask on first before helping somebody else. And he goes into a hypoxia chamber to demonstrate this. And it was a really visual and scientifically rich explanation of something that I experience. Every time I'm on a plane now, I think back to that video when the flight attendant is showing, what to do when the mask comes down. I think back to that video. I think back to the science, and it's a piece of media that plays in my head over and over. And so I think about why that is. And I think that part of it is because it was an explanation that was very clear and very scientifically rich, but also because the video thought about what I, as the viewer, would need and what I would take away from it. And because it was anchored to something that I experience, it was anchored to something that, happens in my daily life, something that might come in useful to me at some point. I really connected to that and I really remembered it. So that's something I try and bring out into the rest of my work. And I will provide the link to that video in the chat once I'm done. And so I think a lot about just creating a relationship with my viewers, because especially over the past couple of years, as we've been trying to sort of communicate science during a pandemic, I did not expect to be doing a lot of viral communication when 2020 started, but because so much of the conversation around the virus and the vaccines were about DNA and RNA that I have expertise in, I wanted to try and join that conversation. And as actually Dr. TVV was mentioning, a big part of that was trying to tell people how science is done and how the process of science works, because typically when we communicate science, we talk about it at the very end. We talk about the fact that scientists did a study and now we're communicating the very end results of peer-reviewed years of work coming out. And during the pandemic, instead, as science communicators, we were trying to communicate about science as it was happening. And a lot of that challenge was about communicating the fact that the science is in process and that science changes as we learn new things, as we do more experiments. And so I really, really thought a lot about how film and how social media could help me connect with the audience and just have a conversation with the people on the other side of the screen. Because I think, as a scientist, we're taught to just present facts and just outline, in the steps of a paper. But I really tried to create media that, instead of just saying, here was the hypothesis and here were the methods and here were the results, I was trying to create media that just answered questions that I had. We were all in this together. We were all asking questions about what was the virus doing? What would the vaccines look like? So I really just tried to answer those in language that I would use when I was explaining it to a friend, and try and build a rapport with the audience that, I did have a background in this, but that I was just a person like everyone else. And we were all sort of asking these questions, but I tried to walk through how the science was done and how I thought about reputable sources, and tried to be really transparent with that in a way that I think, for me, I was easiest able to get across in film. Sometimes people do that wonderfully, in a written medium or in podcasts, but for me, film is the best way to try and forge that connection and to try and just build that rapport and really communicate the science, but communicate the science in a way that I hope is trusted and respected and can show how I find those sort of trusted and respected sources. And so, that was sort of an example from the past couple of years, but I think I'm a little biased because my background is in genetics, but I really think that communicating genetics is something that's very important because it's touching all of our lives every day. And I think more and more people are having to make decisions about genetics, be that what food they're going to eat, or getting test results back from their doctor, or taking an ancestry test online. And I really want to create media that can help to empower people with the vocabulary of genetics and just sort of help them realize that this is an exciting science, but that you don't need to have a PhD in it to understand it. And so one of the things that I, again, sort of hope to try and do with film and do with media is present all of this in an sort of accessible and easily digestible format. And perhaps that was a bit of a pun there, because one of the things that I've been thinking about and working on is, how do I present genetics in some way that people would be interested in? So I've started trying to make some videos about food genetics, because everyone loves food and everyone loves eating. And, again, as Dr. Iqbal mentioned, there's, sort of great value in talking about science when it's wrapped in sort of a cultural and a social lens. And I think that food is a great way to do that and can be sort of a way to draw people in and then talk about the science and say, hey, you know, you're eating this apple, but did you know that apples have kind of weird genetics, and talk about it from that point. So I think, again, that film is, you know, a wonderful visual media, a wonderful way to make that sort of connection and make that rapport. And especially with social media, I think that it's a unique opportunity to really reach out to people who are in the communities that you're in. And even just from an apartment, you know, you don't need a fancy Hollywood studio, but just from wherever you are, you can reach a lot of people. And so I really find a lot of power and value in that and in science filmmaking. And again, you know, I too, when I think about how I consume science content, there is so much of it out there. And again, a lot of the work that I do is in digital media, is in sort of social media and YouTube. And there's just hundreds of hours, thousands of hours probably of content being uploaded at any minute, at any one time. And so it is just a true fire hose of information coming at you. So I don't really know that I have the best way of sorting through that. You know, a lot of it is by interacting and hoping that the algorithms that run all of these channels can help to see that I, you know, appreciate good science communication, and I'd like to see that coming back. But it is hard. I think it's very hard as a content consumer to pick out what is going to be the right thing to watch, the best thing to watch. And so I think it's very hard, actually, as someone watching a lot of media, watching science media, to be able to sort through this. And so, again, that's one of the things that I hope to be able to do by being really transparent, of showing my sources and talking about how I found them and really walking through those steps, that I hope that people will hold me to a high standard of the accuracy of what I am communicating. And I hope that that will encourage them to hold other people to that as well. So yeah, I'll sort of wrap up my comments there, that I think film is really useful and compelling to building that community and building that trust and relationship. And that's where I really think science communication can have a big impact, even if it's a small impact, you know, even if I'm only reaching 100 people, 1,000 people with a video, or even if I'm only reaching one person really deeply. I think that that connection has the power to change minds and has the power to really educate people. So that's one of the reasons why I really love science filmmaking.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dainis. With all the videos that you mentioned and YouTube channels that you mentioned, along with your own amazing science videos that you create, it is very true that you present to us those videos what we need, we as viewers need, and we can relate with. So we are actually going through this journey of overcoming the ignorance in science with you together, which I think is absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much for that. And I'd once again like to thank all the panelists for their opening remarks. I'd like to request them all to switch on their cameras for the discussion now. I think my first question is to Dr. Iqbal. I'd love her to address this. So when I hear people talk about movies like Interstellar or Jurassic Park or even Theory of Everything, as I mentioned, I know that these movies really connect the scientific world to the general public. And apart from all the good they do, is there any downside to the way of science, way the science is portrayed in the movies? I mean, we keep on listing the pros of this media, but would you like to highlight some of the cons in the way the movies communicate science?
Yeah, no, I think there are definitely a lot of pros, and I think the cons are immediately clear. I think if you read some of the reviews of these films, that a lot of times filmmakers, especially if you're talking about a feature film, which are these, you know, popular films you watch in theater, they do take a lot of creative liberties, right, in telling the story of the scientist, of the times the scientist is living through. Even the Imitation Game, which, you know, I mentioned as one of the suggestions. I mean, there are a lot of historical inaccuracies. There are, you know, people who are familiar with Alan Turing's work, who's featured in that film. And they say that, you know, they downplayed certain aspects of his life and overplayed certain other aspects. So there is, of course, filmmakers do tend to take creative liberties to make the story more interesting, and they have the recipe of what works, right? I mean, people like you and me who are who don't know anything about the process of filmmaking, especially feature film, we wouldn't know what makes for a good story, what are the nice ingredients you should add. So yeah, of course, I think that is probably one of the, I mean, the Rocket Boys, the recent series on Vikram Sarabhai and Homi Baba that has come out. It's been thrashed by reviewers, critics. It's been thrashed by people who understand science, who are familiar with Vikram Baba, Sarabhai's and Homi Baba's work. So, and they've taken a lot of creative liberties in the way they've showcased these two scientists in the film. So, of course, scientists, people from science would always criticize, will watch these films with a very critical lens. And perhaps that's why there needs to be more collaboration between the scientific community and the filmmaking community, so that the facts are not twisted so much that they become inaccurate or they convey something that is untrue, especially when you're trying to tell true stories or biopics and things like that. But otherwise, I think if you are making a fiction film, I think it doesn't matter. Of course, science fiction also has its parameters, like certain way, that guidelines that you must follow for it to be called a science fiction film. And so that's something that most filmmakers, I'm sure, are familiar with. But it has its pros and cons. I mean, I can't think of very specific, downsides of such films, whether they have propagated some sort of scientific misconceptions or myths among the public. I can't think of it right now, but I'm sure maybe TV or Vivek or Alex may be able to share some of that. But of course, I mean, there is definitely, if the films are not thought of very carefully, if the science in the film or the stories of these scientists is not thought through very carefully and sensitively and critically, then I think you can go wrong and you may end up telling things that are untrue.
Right. I would absolutely love comments from Dr. TVV as well, because you have done several audio shows, which is a different kind of media. So do you think there is a downside to the audio visual that that is available today? And because your shows definitely have a good following and we are very much inspired by those.
Okay. See, when we talk about downside, I think we have to categorize and then look at it carefully. I may comment, for example, The Man Who Knew Infinity, a film that is made from Hollywood. I would say that the way it has been picturized, the way the story is told, is, in my personal view, a typical East is East, West is West kind of a framework. But that's one kind of a criticism. Here, I am not contesting facts in the film. I'm only contesting or I'm only arguing a different interpretation. That's one kind of a debate. But if you look at Rocket Boys, for example, a character is created there, which is actually reflecting Mehnat Saha, but completely wrong portrayal of Mehnat Saha. Okay, so that is abuse. That is fake. So one has to make a distinction between these two. Some we can have certain opinion about the way it is portrayed. I mean, I'm not very comfortable. The other where it is completely fake. Then there may be a third category where one can say that a bit of sloppy. For example, there was a film called Fantastic Voyage. I mean, young people may not know about it. I mean, old people like we will remember about it. It's one of the early Hollywood science fiction movie where miniaturization happens, and a submarine with some doctors are injected into a scientist's body, so they travel inside. That's a fantastic voyage. Okay, so in that, Isaac Asimov pointed out a number of scientific errors. I mean, for example, when you are miniaturized and when you are brought back to your same size, kind of issues, logical inconsistencies, etc. And Isaac Asimov wrote a series of books based on that fantastic Voyage, correcting this errors. Here, it is not fake. It is not about interpretation, but it's about not really, let's say, scientifically accurate. I mean, there is this kind of a problem. So there are these three kinds of issues when we take liberties with science, which can happen, and we need to make a distinction. We cannot put everything in the same basket. That's my view.
Definitely, sir. And thank you so much for bringing up that movie. Even my father recently mentioned the movie to me, and he's not remotely related to the field. And even then, he remembers it today. So we definitely have a very big opportunity on giving on that impact on the audience through this media. So filmmakers have this responsibility to take care of how science is portrayed, for sure. And would Mr. Kannadi or Dr. Dainis would like to add to what Dr. TVV or Dr. Iqbal said?
Yeah, like I don't want to say it is a downside, but definitely when we make movie, it's not that I have done that, but we try to balance it. But I don't know whether how much. For example, GN Ramachandran, we have made a documentary on him, and he, as a scientist, is extremely good. At the same time, he is very arrogant, very kind of a fighter kind of thing, where he, I mean, he couldn't resist sometimes. He couldn't be like, it's not that like whether we have to tell all those things or not. So some of the things we decided to soften it. Like we don't need to show, like there were turbulent times. That's it. So that kind of thing, I don't know whether we have to tell. For example, if like a series like what Sarah has mentioned, or we have just heard about, like the story on the Rocket Boys, where if it is a series or a film, then human emotions is also equally important, not just the science that people may not. In documentaries, it is possible. It will restrict the audience. That's one field. I'm not an expert to talk about it, but I can say that it is wrong.
Dr. Dainis, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that this is a huge drawback to sort of science filmmaking, but I do think that there has been a trend, especially in the past, and I think we're sort of breaking out of it to get to now, that, you know, when science was presented in sort of documentaries, it was this very perfect, you know, science is always right and scientists are perfect and they know all. And I think that was a huge disservice to science communication in general, that when you present it as that, then when you find yourself in a situation that there's new information, you know, it's really hard for people to sort of accept that the science has changed, but wasn't it the truth? Wasn't it right, kind of thing? So I think there has been in the past, and I think over maybe the last decade, we're sort of starting to get away from this, but I really think that some of the sort of traditional ways of science communication and science media really positioned scientists as these really perfect, wonderful people who, you know, just knew all and were off in the lab doing experiments. And that's not true in both good and bad ways. You know, scientists are still humans. They all have good and bad. Do you want to comment on that?
No. After you.
Yeah. No, I think we're approaching, and I think a lot of recent science media has started approaching something where we're showing scientists as whole humans. And I think that makes the scientists more relatable. And I think that makes the study of how science is done more relatable. And I just think that there have been trends in science media in the past that I think actually did a great disservice to science. And I think we're getting away from them, but I think it hurts science in a lot of ways in portraying it that way. Yeah, Dr. TVV.
Yeah. So one additional point that I wanted to point out while we were discussing on the issue of within quotes downside is issues about cultural prejudices. Okay, I mean, if you look around us, almost all violence anywhere in the world, there might be various names to it, various colors to it, various flags to it. But ultimately, if you scratch it and look underneath, largely it's to do with certain cultural prejudices with which we are growing up. Maybe it's a hate for a particular religion, or a hate for a particular orientation. Lot many, and these prejudices are very subtle. Right? I mean, it's not like it's a declared philosophy. For most of us, it's not a declared philosophy. I mean, after all, in this recent Ukraine crisis, we saw that many media did talk about, oh, these refugees have blue eyes, very different kind of. I mean, after all, any refugee is a refugee. Yeah? I mean, so the prejudices are very subtle. It's there, all of us. It's not like I am holier than you. I mean, all of us have this problem. Science breaks these prejudices, right? Many discoveries in science tells us that we have a common origin, tells us that after all, we are all stardust, right? We are made up of stardust. If we fail to talk about this issue, it may not be the downside, but rather wrongly emphasize, like competition when we talk about evolution. Evolution is not about competition. Evolution is not about the winning of strongest. Then dinosaurs should have been here, not cockroaches, right? So I think in today's world, if we want to remove violence, if we want to remove within quote dukh, that is sadness, okay, I think science communication has a very important role to play. It's not exactly the downside issue, but many times we don't think in this fashion. That's something that I want to put on the table. That's all.
Thank you so much, sir. I think on that note, I'd like to ask Mr. Kannadi a question. So a movie maker has, of course, no bounds when it comes to capturing stories. You can get inspiration from literally everyone and everything. But do you feel any creative limitations while working specifically on science stories, and whether these limitations are technical, political, or conceptual?
Yeah, interestingly, for the same documentary which I was mentioning, we want to have some, I mean, I don't know whether it is like we could have done it if we have a lot of money, but we can create the entire set or whatever. But we want to record some visuals which is like it is happening in 60 years before or 40 years before. Unfortunately, we couldn't find a good furniture that matches to it because we have changed the entire setup. And any equipment which we want to use, maybe a calculator which they used at that time, or a computer, IBM computer, or whatever, we do not have them properly curated, and we cannot access them. And if it is there, we have done a good search in Pune, we couldn't find, and finally we got something which is on the next, next to our campus, NCL Pune. We got some place where we can record something. But we need to have such kind of equipments or materials of at that time where we can keep them properly maintained and other things, so that we can use for such kind of films. Where if we want to represent science in a beautiful way, if they want to see how much of an effort they have to do at that time to do science. For example, if they want to get a science paper, it takes 3 months. That's what I understood from there. Where it's called CMAIL. They have to come through that. If you want to do a correction, it goes another 3 months to go there and come back, and then finally, I don't know how much time to complete one paper. Such hardship there. And now it's just 1 cent button. So we need to keep all those things safe. Maybe we should have a museum where we can keep them, or a place where we can approach, say that we are making this story. Here is my script, and this is what the story I want to make, I need help. So that they will be able to help. So definitely it is a limitation because we do not, for making science movies, we do not get so much of money to produce it. So at that time, it will be difficult to get such things. Definitely, like if you search for it, you will get it. But the time and the effort you have to put is much more. Like, unless it is curated, unless it is kept. I don't know whether I put it correctly.
Yes, sir, definitely. And Dr. Danis, would you like to add something to that? Do you feel there are any creative limitations while working on stories in science?
I mean, I will definitely echo the fact that the budgets for science education and science films are not big. So certainly that is, it's sometimes I'm surprised when I see the budgets for giant Hollywood movies that are, $300 million. And then I see the budget for a science documentary and it's $10,000. And even that is pretty big sometimes. So I do think that there are, budgetary constraints. But one of the things that I've thought about a lot is, for a long time, because my background is in biology, I felt like I could only tell biology stories. And I really felt constrained by that because there's so much other cool science out there that I wanted to explore. But I thought, well, who am I to talk about physics kind of thing? But I have tried to realize in the past couple of years that scientists are so excited to talk about their work that one of the ways to get around that is often to collaborate with the scientist who's doing it and, really reach out to them and work with them. And I've had wonderful opportunity or wonderful success when I've reached out to a scientist and said, hey, I'm not an expert in this field. I've tried to write a script about it. Would you look it over? Would you make sure that I'm headed on the right path? Did I miss any big things in the field? And typically scientists are so excited to talk about the things that they work on that they're very happy to do this and they're happy to collaborate and sort of work together. So I do think that is a limitation I've felt in the past, is sort of feeling like I could only talk about one specific thing, but so much of science is interdisciplinary that I've tried to branch out from that and tried to sort of creatively move out to speaking to these places where there are connections, but always trying to do that again, because accuracy is so important and because that trust is so important, always trying to do that with somebody else who actually works in that field. And it's where scientists loving to talk about their science is wonderful. And I think being able to sort of be a bridge where they may not have the communication time or experience to be able to communicate their own science. And so it's a lot of fun to be able to connect with them and say, okay, you'll help with the science part, but I can help with the communication part. So that can help to break down some of those creative constraints sometimes, at least on subject matter.
Thank you so much, Dr. Danis. We'd also love comments from Dr. TVV and Dr. Iqbal.
See, there is a question in the comment box, chat box. So can I take it up? I mean,
sure, sir, sure.
Along with that, I'll also look at this question. Of course, as everyone pointed out, science filmmaking does not have enough budget. That's one major challenge. And second, though, for example, social media outlet is emerging as an alternate channel for sharing your program that you are making, the traditional television media in India still do not have adequate space. See, earlier there used to be a system where the Doordarshan, the country's one largest television network, and certain public service organization got together, had some funding opportunities for making good films. I mean, not only on science, many other, but including science. But nowadays those kinds of opportunities are dwindling. So most of the opportunities that are coming from established institutions are corporate filmmaking, right? Of course, Vigyan Prasad, we have still, because of the India Science Television, some opportunities for people to work, but that's only within a limit, right? So funding in India for independent filmmakers to make science film, is still an important challenge. I mean, that's one that makes a very like, say, there are some films, like we made one film about saffron growing. So if you have to make a film on saffron, then you'll have to film at least for 2 years, because you have to film during different seasons. You plan for this season, you go there, you may not get your shots. So that's why 2 years. I mean, you'll have to at least look at 2 seasons. So that kind of leeway for I mean, here I'm talking about time leeway. Different films will have its own needs. We don't look at them. I mean, we look at very shortcut, some photographs and then patched up. But then finally, you make a film which is very insipid, right? A film which could have, I mean, yes, marginal budget could have made that film a very excellent film. I mean, we end up doing this. These are all important challenges when we talk about constraints, which I see all around. Because I work in Vigan Prasar, I personally may not have felt that kind of a constraint, but we are a community, so we know what's happening around, right? So that's all. There is a very interesting question which has been placed in the chat box by Shiv Shankar, saying that many of us focus on what may be called as big signs or dazzling signs, like rockets or nuclear power. But do we really bother about simple signs, small labs? Well, I think the sense that Mr. Shiv Shankar is communicating is right, but I think that is not the case anymore in India. That's what I wanted to say. Even within Vigyan Prasar, if you look at, for example, one of our major activity called as India Science Wire, the focus is on Indian labs, largely other than space and atomic energy. Because space and atomic energy already a lot of people are covering, so we don't need to make a special effort. So we do focus on that kind of effort. It's not like we completely black out atomic energy and space, but that's not our main focus. Okay, consciously that we make that choice. Similarly, if you look at, for example, Life of Science, it's a website, it's a group of people, and for last few years they have been doing a very excellent job of reaching out to small labs, people who may not be celebrities within quote, science celebrities, but doing very excellent work. They have been able to bring out women, people with different sexual orientation, a lot of such things. Very, very interesting work is happening. Research Matter, for example, another group. They also look at research happening in universities, right? We need to go a long way. I'm not saying that everything is happening, so it's fine. We need to go a long way, but the beginnings are there. So we cannot have a very blanket thing that the whole science communication in India is focused only on atomic energy and space. That's not true. That's not the current landscape. That's what I want to say. We need to go more. We need to bring in even smaller universities where there are a lot of very interesting work is going on. In fact, just yesterday, I read a news from one university called Manonmaniam University, a state university in Tamil Nadu, where they have found the genes which is responsible for earthworm to regrow. Okay, so I mean, like this, universities, when the work happens, usually it doesn't get press coverage. Maybe a local, press might cover, and many of them are not science background. So, value that one should attach generally gets lost. So we need to walk a long distance, but beginnings are there. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so
I just wanted to add one more thing that, if for science content to compete with other kind of content, we will have to put in more investments. There is no other option for us. And because if we continue to under-invest in science based content, then we will never be able to compete with the kind of content we see out there on OTT channels, on YouTube and Instagram, TikTok and all of that. There is no way we can compete with that. And so there definitely, I think, without a doubt, there needs to be more investment. And I think, I just kind of briefly mentioned about silos. Like, so the creative industry in India is working in its own little world. It has very little connection with the scientific world. And I think that bridge needs to be made. I think the scientific community and also the science communication community will understand the kind of investment, both in terms of, financial investment and human resource investment that actually goes into making good quality, high quality films. And I think that interaction, that cross-pollination, that collaboration needs to happen, I guess, for us to really push out high quality content that, can really. And the other thing is that another reason why films are great is because in India, we have very high, we don't have very high scientific literacy, or literacy for that matter. So I guess films work really well, even with illiterate audiences. Like, they don't need to know or how to read or write. I mean, they are, so it's a very powerful medium even to reach out to those sections of the society that may not necessarily have got the chance to learn how to read and write. So that's also why I think there needs to be more investment in this medium. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, on those lines, I'd also like to ask one more question to Dr. Iqbal and Dr. TV. So India specifically has undoubtedly a rich history in science, but there are many unknown stories as well, as we mentioned earlier. Today, people are taking initiatives to celebrate these stories of science in India. So how satisfied are you with this current scenario? And what do you wish to see in the field of science filmmaking in the next 5 years?
Go for it, TV.
No, I'm slightly confused, so I want a clarification. That's what I was just starting. So when you say that history of science, are you talking about the ancient period or the current contemporary context, or what is it you are exactly saying? I'm just
I think I am talking about the stories that have gone unknown. Like Dr. Iqbal mentioned that recently there was a documentary film that highlighted 3 of the scientists which have very significant work in the field, but we didn't know much about them. So nowadays these initiatives are being taken, but are you satisfied with those, with that current scenario, and what will you be willing to see in the next 5 years?
Yeah, okay. So here I'm going to comment as a citizen of India or citizen of the world rather than from the institution that I work or whatever. Okay, so that caveat, I want to put it on the ground. So when we want to celebrate people, why do we want to celebrate people? That's, I think, first question we need to ask. We want to create role models so that we want to show that in India we can do it. That's one purpose. We want to show that people from different backgrounds can excel. Yeah, so again, a kind of role model, but with a slightly different. For example, Janaki Ammal comes from a disadvantaged community. But I mean, not many of us will know. When you are eating sugar, okay, remember unseen hand of Janaki Ammal is there in India. Okay. Yes, I mean, it's important that we bring all these people into our debate, I mean, our discussion. Also for the purpose, I think that many people are mistakenly classifying modern science as Western science, as if the modern science roots in terms of its ethos, in terms of logic and so on, are rooted in the Western civilization. No, it's not true. It's modern science. You know, I mean, there is China, India, almost all over the world, all the civilizations have contributed to this river. We were all tributaries. The ancient civilizations are tributaries. The modern science is the river, right? So if you want to bring that also, I think talking about not just from India, then we need to also talk about from all over the world. Okay, from Africa, from China, from Arabic or Persian civilization. You know, we need to bring this. So you can't be then narrow, parochial. Talk about only my, you know, then you will end up in the other arena. This framework, if we are looking at it, I think we need to do it. We need to reclaim science as a common human heritage, which is under challenge from many quarters. For that, these efforts help. These efforts, and even within India, if you want to look at it, I mean, the kind of prejudices that we have for different sections. If you want to break it, we also need to again bring how people from different backgrounds, different communities, different sections have come forward and done work, which is why we have certain level of development that we have today, right? So if you want to talk all this, I think so the purpose is important. It's not about the person, why we are doing. I think we need to ask that question. Otherwise, what will happen is that it will become another jingoism. Another jingoism will bring in only more suffering, not beauty.
Dr.
Yeah, I completely agree with TVV that we have to trace the history of science more holistically. It cannot be just post-independent modern science that you get to hear about in India, or Western science that you get to hear. So I guess there definitely needs to be very slightly more in-depth exploration of science in our context, and those should be the stories that we should be sharing. And even I think the underpinnings of science that is happening today, maybe tracing that, how did we come about doing all of this. And I agree with the TV that there needs to be the purpose of such films or documentaries should be very clear, because a lot of times feature films are not there to necessarily inform. They're there to kind of educate, entertain, and do a lot of other things. But documentary, on the other hand, have very clear purpose. Documentaries usually have a very clear purpose, and so do these short form content that you see in other places. Another very interesting thing that I came across recently when I was exploring science fiction is that China is promoting science fiction in a very big way in China now, even though China has had long history of science fiction, and so does India actually. But the kind of science fiction that has entered India is again from the West. Like, that's the science fiction we consume today, or that's the format we consume today. But there has been other formats of science fiction in India, and so they are promoting science fiction in China as a way to popularize science, and as a way to encourage young people to take up science and think innovatively. But that's a borrowed idea from the Silicon Valley, where apparently a lot of these big tech geeks or tech entrepreneurs there are big sci-fi geeks, and they consume a lot of science fiction content, and so it's kind of probably inspired from there. But it's still very interesting to see how they're using the format of science fiction to really get young people interested in science. And I think that is something we've not explored a lot or enough in India. Perhaps that's also a direction we could look at. We've mostly been providing like non-fiction content to inspire young people in science. If that's one objective, I can say, is to inspire the next generation of scientists. The other could be perhaps we could explore more of science fiction in the country. And I think Vigyan Prasad, of course, is doing quite a lot of stuff in that space also. TVV, you wanted to say, yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to bring few facts to the audience, because we were just discussing it, some curious facts, let's say. The earliest science fiction in India was around 1850s, almost the same time when Jules Verne, etc. were writing. Okay, so two stories which came about that time, science fiction stories. One is titled as 1947. Okay, so that story says that how the Indian, within quotes, rebel won Indian independence from British. Accidentally 1947. Okay, so that's one. The second story is by the author is a woman. She talks about, it's a world somewhere else where the gender disparity doesn't exist. Okay. Same way, in Tamil, one of the earliest story was written by a person called Subramanya Bharatiya. I mean, he's also called as national poet and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So in that, he travels to 7 worlds. I mean, the Indian mythology, 7 worlds. And then he finds that in all those worlds, people are laughing at the India, where we have caste division, where we are not treating women as equal, so on and so forth. I mean, it's a criticism of the existing society. So this kind of science fiction, where the science fiction is a way to imagine a future world, alternate world, I think emerged in India much earlier. Although the pulp kind of science fiction, that is basically the same Hollywood story, but put in a different time and put in a different place. That's all, the same villain hero story. Well, that pulp fiction, of course, is a very different thing altogether. Just I thought I'll just something I'll share. That's.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Dainis, would you like to chime in the conversation and add to the comments?
Yeah, I think, going back a little bit to what TVV was saying about thinking about sort of who we're featuring and why, it's something I think about a lot, because at least in the US, when I was growing up, when you'd see a scientist on the news, it was typically an older white man, and that was who was interviewed. And when I was in grad school, that just isn't the reality of who's in the lab. I mean, it's people of all ages, it's men, it's women. And depending on, what year it was, I could count people from 8 different countries sitting in the same lab that I was in. And so I think that, featuring, diverse scientists is important for role models, but it's also just important for accuracy. I mean, we need to be representing the fact that science isn't just done by one type of person. The reality is that it's done by everyone. And so I think, for me, when I'm thinking about who I want to talk to, who I want to feature, I will often ask to speak to grad students and postdocs and undergrads and trainees, because I feel like they're also just sort of in that age disparity. People don't talk to them often. People want to talk to the PI, but the PI usually isn't the one who's actually done the work in the lab. They've been out of the lab for years and are just sort of running it. So I think just thinking about who we feature, I think it's so important for role models. I think that's a huge thing, but I think it's also just for accuracy, for the same accuracy we're trying to say about we want the science to be correct. I think we have to be representing diverse people in scientific films, because that's who's actually doing the science. So I think for me, that's another reason to do it, is because it just is.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kannadi, would you like to add something to that?
I think no.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I think my next question would be to Dr. Dainis. You have successfully been able to engage a large audience through your exciting science videos. So with what aim in mind did you start making these videos? And what is your vision today? And also, what is the feedback that you get from the audience?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because my goal has changed a lot over time. So truly, my goal when I started making YouTube videos about a decade ago now was just to have fun, was just that I loved science. I loved talking about science. And so this was a really great creative outlet. And that was great. And it is still fun. But I think now, whenever I make a piece of media, I think about 3 things. I try and think about audience, goal, and environment. And so thinking about who my audience is helps me figure out, what do they need? What background information do they need? What can I assume they know? What can I assume they don't know? The environment, I sort of think about is it very logistically, is it going to be a YouTube video, a TikTok? Is it going to be a written piece? What is that going to look like? Because each of those is going to demand something different. But now that goal is also really different too. And sometimes for a video, it is just to deliver a piece of information. Sometimes it's to make science more relatable. But I think my overarching goal now is really just to sort of make science a little bit less scary for people, I think. And that's always evolving. It's always sort of moving. But I really right now think that I just don't want people to be scared of science. I want people to realize that, science is here for you. It's here with you. It's here all around you. And I don't know that I always reach that, but that truly, especially over the past couple of years, I've sort of been moving towards that I want people to think genetics is cool and not scary. And I want people to realize that scientists are just people, just like you. And I really think that humanization of science is what my goal is now. So it started off as just a fun thing, and it still is really fun. But now I hope that with the experience I've gained of doing it for so long, I can sort of reach some of these bigger goals of just trying to, saying that I want to be an ambassador for science feels a little too big. But I want to just sort of make it fun for other people as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dainis. I think it's time we open the floor for the audience questions. All the members, if you'd like to add any comments or questions, you can either raise your hands and unmute yourself for the questions, or write down in the Zoom chat box, as well as the YouTube live chat for those who are joining through YouTube. So we have a first question from Mr. Sip Sankar. How can science communication play a role in communication and inculcating a sense of critical thinking in public? While we boast our ancient roots in science, how exactly it will help people so that they don't just blindly follow some WhatsApp universities or some consideration from any popular public figure? I think what he's trying to ask is what to trust with so much content out there. So I think Dr. Dainis would like to answer this question.
Absolutely. This is a huge thing that I think about all the time, because if I am trying to deliver a piece of information and somebody right next to me is delivering a piece of misinformation, how is someone supposed to know which one of us they should trust? And I feel that absolutely, it is hard as someone who doesn't have a background in these things to piece apart what is information, what is misinformation. And that's why sort of was what I was saying earlier, is that I try and be really transparent about where I get my sources from. And I do try and talk about what is a good source and what is a bad source. I think especially right now, there's so much information that's coming out with preprints and articles and Twitter threads, and all of that can be great. I love preprints. I think they're fantastic. But you have to take everything with a grain of salt, and you have to take it with, this sort of media literacy lens that I don't know that all of us have. So my strategy for that is just to be very transparent about it, that I am going to tell you where I got my sources. I'm going to tell you why I think something is true. I'm going to tell you, sort of why I'm looking through that, and hope that people will demand that of everyone that they're looking at. But it's incredibly hard. It's so hard, because somebody who wants to spread misinformation can make something look like it has sources, can make something look like it has data just by cherry picking little pieces. And so it's an incredibly hard problem. And I think it really is asking a lot of people. And I think that's why, it's always helpful. And this time it has been really hard that there's so much information flying around, but I think being able to point at trusted places, the WHO, for example, was someplace I pointed to a lot, that, that was at least something that a lot of people had heard of and could point to. I think it's just really asking to be critical, and to also ask of every piece of media that you consume, ask why the person is telling you this information and what their goal is. What is the goal of that person who's trying to tell you that information? Are they just trying to deliver information? Are they trying to sell you something? Are they trying to get you to take an action? I think we all as consumers need to be very skeptical of everything. So again, I try and model that, and that's one way that I try and get that across, but it's an incredibly hard problem.
Thank you so much. Dr. Iqbal, being someone that works actively into science communications and public engagement, would you like to place your perception in the picture as well?
Yeah, and I completely echo Alex's almost helplessness in this situation, because I feel these kind of disinformation and misinformation networks are so sophisticated, so widespread, that I don't think we have any system in place that can really fight it real time. And so I think, I'm sure there are various other things that can be done to tackle it in real time. But I think media literacy, something that Alex also brought up, I think has to happen. We need to maybe organize sessions in schools on media literacy, on spotting fake news for young children, and really start that young. And I guess even teaching science, I think we've lost that element of critical thinking. We just kind of shove facts down them and say, this is science. But really, science helps you to think critically through things. And I think that's something that's missing in the way we teach science today. And I think that needs to be brought back. But irrespective of whether you're a student of science or not, I think this needs to be a widespread training in media literacy, in spotting fake news across schools in the country, across the world. I guess that's one way of really tackling this problem, because I think we cannot have the same sort of sophistication and in spreading good information, because there's so many channels, there's so many people like Alex, like Vigyan Prasad, that is constantly putting out accurate information, but that's clearly not working, because misinformation is still there. The WhatsApp university that we refer to in India as the channel for misinformation is still there. So I guess that's at least one way of looking at of addressing it now. Hopefully in the times to come, we'll have slightly more, we'll have better equipped, more empowered people who can look through all this BS that's being shared with them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iqbal, and thank you, Mr. Sipsankar, for the question. I think Ms. Abha Shams would like to ask a question. You can unmute yourself and ask the question to the panelists.
Thanks, Srushti. So my question is that our scientific community does have a definitive gender bias, that a lot of women's discoveries, their work has been pushed to the side and has not come across to the public like it should. So what do you think about movies like, let's say, Hidden Figures, which was about Black women who worked in NASA, who worked for some very important discoveries for USA to win the space race? And other movies like that let us know more about the origin of these scientific discoveries that have actually become very mainstream, very widespread, very important to us, but we tend to forget where it came from, who it came from. So what do you think of films, especially I would say mainstream films, as a way of letting people know the stories of women especially?
Dr. TVV, would you like to address the question?
Yeah. I mean, one thought that I wanted to share. Let's look at, for example, the example that Shams mentioned, Hidden Figures. There are two ways of looking at it. One is to look at as there were few individuals who were prejudiced against women, and then they suppressed these women. That's one way of looking at it. The second way to look at it is that how in our society, in our way we have organized a society, there are structural discrimination, which does not actually depend so much upon the particular individual's thought processes or predispositions. Okay, so while there are people with prejudiced mind, very clear, we all see that in our daily life. The real harm or the most worst harm is not done by those few individuals. It's by the structure. I think we need to understand this. Otherwise, we'll be thinking in terms of the usual Hollywood, Bollywood film, good guys, bad guys. No, it's not about good guy, bad guy. The system. So the questions that we need to then ask in a country like India is, what are the specific issues in India? Okay, what are the specific kinds of structural discrimination that exist in India? So if you are looking at US, for example, color of a person is a structural issue. But in India, the color of the person may not be the major structural issue, but something else. I mean, we are all very shy to talk about it, right? I mean, even I'm shy to talk about it. But then we all know in India what it is, right? So yeah. So what are they? It's not only one. There are many, right? So yes. So it is this structural question that we need to address rather than if you do. That's one thought. That's all. Sorry. Carry on.
Dr. Iqbal, would you like to add to that?
No, I can't believe I forgot to mention the Hidden Figures. I absolutely love that film. And I think it also, what was very sobering in that film was that it happened so recently. Like those women went through that as recent as a few decades back. And I think that is what really kind of shook me when I watched that film. And that, of course, that I could see a lot of parallels with India, and the status of women in the workforce, in the scientific workforce in India. There's so many parallels you can draw. I completely agree with TVV that the cultural context would be different. The kind of issues they raised were different, and they would play out differently in India. But I could definitely see, I mean, that film definitely was successful in bringing out those stories and bringing out those issues and really making you see that a lot of these issues still exist. Maybe you don't have that, maybe you have that extra women's bathroom in laboratories today or in scientific institutions today. Maybe you've created that, but what about the other structural issues that still inhibit them from participating fully in the scientific workforce? So, I mean, I guess it depends on how deeply you watch these films and how much you reflect after watching such films. But there's definitely very important in bringing out these issues and really helping us reflect on whether we've managed to address them today or how far are we from really addressing these issues today. So it's a good reminder. I think these films they're not in the past. They're very much still relevant in our present times.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Iqbal. Mr. Sips uncle, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, thank you, first of all, to all the panelists who have given their respective talks on such wonderful topics. Sir and ma'am, I had some questions regarding this ancient cultures which you were mentioning, that putting this and extracting the actual science from it, whether to understand which is actual science and which is pseudoscience, it is very important. And as Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore both mentioned, that nationalism is transient and internationalism leads to a greater thing. So at times in India, it happens that we become biased cognitively and consider anything anything from the ancient text as science. Means in the name of science, we spread it. But what would you suggest that how could we encapsulate critical thinking into these things and then understand means what roots are there in the ancient times with regard to science? Like the prime example of pseudoscientific documentary series is Ancient Aliens. There are many episodes with regard to Indian ancient times, but it is all imaginative and no no proper resources are available for this. I just wanted to know that how do you science communicators tackle with all these things?
Dr. TVV, would you like to address that question?
Yeah. One is, I think, if you look at how in India we react to the claims which are there in the ancient past, ancient past literature in India. One is uncritical celebration. Okay. The other is, let's say, a critical appropriation. Both are there. Serious works are also there. But what we should understand is that why we are thinking so much about the past. For example, in Italy, do they sit and think the Italian civilization, ancient civilization, knew everything? Why they are not? Why it is not a question for them, but why we think that it's a question for us? That has to do with the colonial experience. So during the colonial period, we were told that East is East, West is West. So East thinks about the other world, West thinks about this world. That is one kind of distinction that that was spread. The East is not logical mind; they are emotional mind. So that's why, for example, riots come in East, but whereas the Western world is logical. So that is why they are all democratic. They all sit and talk. Well, this kind of myths were created. So we wanted to come out of that. So there are two ways of coming out. One way to say that no, we were all, everything was good. The other is to say that, yeah, you are wrong. Your perceptions are wrong. You are wearing a colored glass and then you are seeing through it. Riots did not just happen in India. It happened in Europe. Women were hanged saying that they were witches. What else you will call it? The kind of violence that was happening between two sections within, let's say, Christian religion. Catholics and Protestants, violence. So why you are not calling it as a riot? So by naming things, I mean, so world over, people have done folly. World over, people have been brilliant. Whatever be your culture or region, everything. So we need to celebrate the rationality. We need to celebrate the reason. We need to celebrate the humanism, wherever from it is. Then we have a solution, right? But unfortunately, that's what I was pointing out, that sometimes we have this knock-knee reaction. No? So in that knock-knee reaction, we get into that other extreme where we are actually doing the same thing. We are just but the other side of the coin. We are not new, right? So that's something that we need to be very careful of. Okay, that we need to be careful of. Not just India, Africa, they have done excellent work. You look at let's say the ancient civilization in American continent. I mean, they have had sophisticated number systems with very big base number. Imagine having a very big base number and having a sophisticated number system. It's not simple. Yeah. So there is a tribe in South America who use a binary number system, which, for example, within quotes, you might call as, the most modern computers use it. Yeah. So I think we need to respect all, not make us special. The chosen people is always a problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. TVV. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Sibsankar. And there is one more question in the chat for Mr. Kannadi. So watching and critiquing a film is easy as a viewer, but can you throw some light on the work that happens behind the scenes? Can you highlight the process of picking up a human story in science and turning it into an engaging script?
Instead of telling a science story, I can tell you some film which I worked.
Sure.
I spent almost 45 days in a movie where I would have done a success. I mean, if I worked for a successful movie, I will get the credit as if Vivek was part of that movie. Okay, but if that movie is a failure, my work is my work. I have spent the same 45 days for both the films. So we have put our hard work, but it is like sometimes that seeing, which I was telling you in the beginning itself, what we have seen was not proper. Or for me, for the team, we felt that it is proper, but unfortunately, the audience didn't want to. Couldn't expect it, or maybe it is a not timely release. Could be. I'm just giving an example, not like. I don't know whether I answered it properly, but.
Yes, you do. Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Dainis, would you like to share your experiences as well? What are the challenges, according to you, that behind the scenes of filmmaking, the work that happens on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, my work is a little different in that I'm absolutely never developing, sort of a longer feature film about one person in sort of one point in history. A lot of what I'm doing is trying to find sort of interesting little stories that I can sort of tap into and take. So they're much shorter productions and they're a little bit faster. But I'll give a not challenge before I give the challenge, but one of the most rewarding things has been that typically if I reach out to a scientist and want to talk about their paper, want to talk about their work, almost always they will emphatically agree and say yes and want to talk with me and agree to an interview. I think because there's such a desire in science to talk about their work and to, try and share it, but there isn't always an outlet for that. We don't always give scientists, they write a paper and they submit the paper and then often that's it. Maybe they'll go to a conference or something. So I have been really happy about the fact that, my favorite thing to do is talk to scientists. And typically when I reach out, they say yes, and they want to talk about an interview. But I think one of the challenges is sometimes how to take a story that is about something quite small or something that you can't see and really make it something visual. I mean, especially with a lot of the work that I'm talking about. So I'm talking about DNA, which there are only so many times you can look at an animation of DNA before it gets old. The work of working in a molecular biology lab looks like moving clear liquids from one place to another place. It's not easy visually to show it. So it's a fun creative challenge, but I think that is one of the biggest challenges, is thinking about how do I take something that perhaps somebody's studying because we can't see it, because we can't see what's happening in that cell. And so they've had to do 15 different experiments with different data points to all sort of draw this fuzzy blueprint of what's going on in there. How do I take that and pull it out of charts and data and make it something visual? And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is truly just that visualization. It's easy for me to interview the person and talk with them, but there's a lot that goes into then trying to think of analogies or animations to actually show people that in a way that's interesting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dainis, for your insights. And now I'll take one final question from the chat by Ms. Rachna. The tag science itself puts off many readers who think that scientific tests are difficult to read. So how science communication can break the language barriers? So Dr. TVV, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, true, it does. I mean, so does many other names for many people. For example, how many of this audience would say that anything that comes with politics they will read? May not, right? Yeah. So it's it's with our upbringing, the kind of climate that we have as a big role to play. That's number one. But that's not the complete answer. That's only one part of it. Okay. So what I just pointing out is that just because we have a hammer in hand, we should not see nails everywhere. That will be very false. So that's one thing. The second thing is it's either creating a story which has a knowledge need. That is, I want to know, why should I wash my hands during the pandemic? As any person, I mean, I have a knowledge need. So, okay. The other is cultural need. All of us are human beings. So we don't think only about eating, sleeping, having a clothing, not just only basic need. From the dawn of civilization, we have been asking this question, no, who are we? Where are we coming from? Right? So these big questions. So if your program answers either of these two, then people won't see it as, science. Otherwise, people will see it as, some pedagogic thing that you should be, actually, I did whatever that I want to, or rather I'm mandated to do in school, that's finished. Don't bring me back that bad memories. That's how people will look at it. So it's about how you are going to frame your program is what makes it, popular or appealing.
Thank you so much, sir. I'd also like to ask Dr. Dainis, do you think of audience who want to see your content, let's say in Spanish? Like, how do you reach the Spanish speakers in US?
That's really hard. So it's funny that you use the example of Spanish, because I took 8 years of it in school. I can understand Spanish, but I am not at a point anymore that I feel like I could appropriately translate my videos into another language. And so that's something where there actually used to be an amazing tool on YouTube where people in the community could submit translations and they could, go through and do that. And it was wonderful because I don't have that ability to translate. I could maybe get by with a Spanish translation, but it wouldn't be great. But I certainly couldn't do a German translation. There are 1,000 other languages that I could not translate it into. And so I've actually been very sad that that has disappeared. There's no longer that ability for people to do that. So sometimes I will have people reach out, and I almost always say yes to this if somebody asks that they've seen some of my videos and they want to translate it and re-upload it somewhere, post it to their community. And especially for, public information and knowledge things, I always say yes to that. But it's not great, because it's just relying on the kindness of strangers to do it. One of the things that I have tried to do, there's actually an organization in the US called the Described and Captioned Media Program. And so they help to make sure that every one of my videos has at least a good, high quality English caption track. And so that can then more easily be translated into other languages. But it's hard. I don't appropriately reach all of those audiences. I know that I'm not reaching as many people as I could be because I'm one person and I don't have the skill to do all that. And I don't have the bandwidth to get people to do that. But I would love to see another service or another sort of functionality or another app out there that, I could put my caption files into that would give me something better than a Google Translate translation, because I do feel like there is a need for that. And on an individual level, I don't think that every creator just has the ability to do that. But I think it's important. And I wish those tools were better instated by places like YouTube. They had a great tool. I don't know why they took it away, places like TikTok and Instagram, because it is a problem that, I try and make it very accessible, but it is in English. And so another thing that I've been thinking about, this is a little bit of a tangent, but, I was listening to a report last night that even in the United States, 1 in 5 people don't have access to the internet, not on a computer, not on a phone, and typically not in like a public library setting. So even the work that I do, that I try and make free and accessible to the internet, is still not reaching a lot of people even nearby. And so, there are all these layers to this accessibility that every time I think I've hurdled one, there are another 5. And I just feel like, if I had a team of coders, I'd want them to tackle this kind of problem, because there is great information coming out of all of these different places. I want access to all of the great information coming out of India and coming out of, Germany, and just coming out of all these different places that may or may not be in English. And I don't do a great job of that, but I think it is something that I hope to be able to do better. It's a very long answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dainis. And now, as we come to the end of the discussion, I'd like to ask a final question to all the panelists. So, do you have a favorite science idea or a project, real or fantasy, that you wish to see on the screen? So I'll repeat that question. Do you have a favorite science idea or a project, whether real or fantasy, that you wish to see on screen? And we'll start with, let's say, Dr. TVV. Would you like to address it? Yeah.
Yes. There is a mathematical problem called cake cutting problem. Okay, the cake cutting problem is like if I have a cake and we are 2 people and I have to cut the cake half so that both of us take the half. If I cut the cake, the other person will always say that maybe you cut it little extra for you, or you took the more of icing for you. So how do you solve it? For solution is very simple. Solomon's Aesop story, if you have remember, I cut, you choose. So I cut, so I know that I have done equal. You choose whichever you think is okay. What if there are 3 people? What if there are 4 people? What if there are more people? Okay, so this is the question. In fact, this whole theory was developed. The name, again, old age sometimes slips the name. One Hungarian mathematician, when the Europe was undergoing a lot of wars. Okay, so you have to do negotiations. So negotiation, one country might say that that is not what is important for me. So how do you solve this kind of? that's a background, but of course, maths doesn't solve it that simply. I want to make a program on this, and I want to connect with the Indian mythology. I mean, tell the story through a mythology. I'm sure all of us have read Mahabharata. In that, there is this Krishna and Krishna's friend who has many number of children, right? So Krishna gives him gift whenever he visits. So every time he goes back, his number of children increases. He is supposed to be having 27 children. So when children increase, that how did he manage? So I mean, using this as a framework, I want to do it. And I've been working on this for last 10 years. I have not been able to do it actually. The idea is there, it's not coming out.
Thank you so much, sir. That is indeed a very fascinating idea. We'll be looking forward to that project. Dr. Iqbal, would you like to share your experience?
I don't know how to go after TV after his idea. I actually also wanted to quickly respond, if you would allow me, to Rachna's question about how science puts off people. And I think that's a very valid concern. I think that's something that I also wonder a lot about, that as soon today, more so than before, people are put off by the idea of science, that, oh, it's a science event, I'm not going to go. So, and I think as science communicators, we're usually reaching to the converted. So there are people who are already interested in science and they want more scientific information. They want to learn more about the advancements in science, and we are preaching to them. And so we're not really reaching out to those who are either not participating in science or they are indifferent towards science. And I think that's a very, very valid question. I just wanted to kind of put it out there. And I think it's also because increasingly scientific literature is becoming very difficult to understand, and it's becoming harder to access. A lot of the scientific literature is behind paywalls. These scientific papers are becoming very difficult to understand. Like, I feel like there is a competition as to how difficult you can make your scientific communication, how complicated. And I think I used to go through a lot of these scientific papers and try to put them into slay summaries. And I honestly, as a scientist, I didn't enjoy reading those papers, as interesting as those discoveries they were claiming to have made in those papers. I just didn't enjoy reading those papers. So I think there's definitely a lot of different factors that are pushing people away from science. And I also agree with TV that there are also other fields, like I think finance, law, that puts off people. I mean, I sometimes, when somebody says anything about finance, I just I know nothing about it. I have no interest in it. And so I think it would be unfair to say that science is the only field that people are, feel that it's inaccessible. I think there are other fields there. All fields are becoming difficult to understand because the jargon is increasing and the complexity of communication is increasing. So that's definitely, I think, a challenge we must keep in mind when we are approaching science communication, engagement, and all of that we should not be like, oh, you don't like science, there's nothing I can do about it. You are actually the people we need to convert through whatever we are trying to do. And so I just wanted to say that's a really good point that Rachna raised. I don't know what scientific idea I would like to see on screen. I think I definitely want to see more human stories. I think that is something I want to see more of, and I would want to work towards making systems and platforms and supporting creatives like Vivek and Alex, who are bringing out these fantastic content out there. So I would like to be the enabler, the facilitator. I don't think I'm as talented as the two of them. So I would want to look into various strategies and approaches that can be employed to really scale up science filmmaking and really explore how we can support different genres of filmmaking. We discussed a few here, but there are so many different genres and formats rather of filmmaking that can be discovered. So that's really what I would like to see over the years. That's what I would like to maybe explore over the years. But there's so many very interesting scientific ideas that it would be nice to see them on screen as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iqbal. Dr. Dainis?
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit before, but the dream project that I've been trying to get made and I want to get made is a food show, and it is a food and travel show. And part of it is selfish because I want to eat a lot of food and learn about it. But, going to places and eating food with the scientists who are studying it. So, going to someone who is studying the microbiology of cheese and eating all these different cheeses and talking about why the different bacteria make them taste different, or going to somebody who's sequencing, sourdough yeast genomes and talking about all of the different, trees that give it the different flavors. And I think that sort of talking to this problem of how do we reach people who are turned off by science, I don't want it to be a science show. I want it to be a food show. I want it to be something that people come to because they're excited to learn about the food. And then sneakily, we talk about the science, we layer that science in so that I'm drawing them in with food. And I haven't gotten it made yet, but this is my dream thing. And again, talking about the budgets, there's no budget right now. So the little trials I'm doing are just me talking in my kitchen, but I want to be able to travel to these places and go to where the food is from and talk to the people who are making the food and then layer in the science. That's my total dream.
By the way, one of the person has given a comment that you should also go to space and eat space food.
I would love to.
Yep, that's a great idea. We'd be definitely looking forward to this show. And Mr. Kannadi.
Hi. Yeah, it was so interesting what Alex has pointed. So interesting story. Even we have a Atal Incubation Center at our place where they make startups. So I was also putting out some idea in that direction where how we can communicate the science in food. Where if you want to make sambar, you cannot put all. Sambar is a curry in India. So if you put all of them together and boil it, it's not going to happen. It has its own timing. It's so beautiful. Okay, my dream is I was recently interviewing Professor Mashelkar. And there is some connection with what Shivshankar has asked, where he was talking about how there are two things. One is about basmati rice, and many of similar kind, where there is a lot of patent issues, clashes between other countries and India, where especially on turmeric, where how the wound healing effect of turmeric. There was a paper, and suddenly he could remember how his mother took care of a crow which fallen down because of a wound, and so then suddenly he think about it, and he had coined a term called traditional medicines, traditional knowledge, where if you go to a patent office, if you search for turmeric powder wound healing, it may not be there because it may be written in Sanskrit, or it may be written in Marathi, or it may be written in some Indian language, or maybe there are 2,000 or more languages in India. So it is difficult to find. So he has fought for it, and it will be great to have a series on him, like the Breaking Bad or something like that.
Thank you so much, sir. I know that we are a little beyond our time, but we would love to have your feedback about thoughts on today's session. So I'll quickly run through the room again. Dr. Dainis, how did you like the session?
Thank you again so much for inviting me. I feel like we could continue this conversation on any one of these topics for another 2 hours, but I really thought, I'm honored to be a part of this panel. Everyone is so wonderful at what they do. And I really think there's a lot to think about here about sort of what we're doing in science communication, how we can move science communication forward, and, how we can all sort of work together. Hopefully we all have a common goal that we're trying to get at. And so, yeah, I just thank you so much for having me. This was really, really fascinating.
And if we could also suggest some improvements for the further sessions.
Oh gosh, improve. This was fantastic. You'll have to come back around, because truly, I think that this was wonderful. And the only issue is just that we're out of time, because I think we truly could have talked about any one of these things for a lot longer.
Dr. TVV?
First thing, I learned a lot. Learned a lot from the panelists and also from the questions which have come. So, usually that gives you new spark. I mean, otherwise you are in one kind of a rut, right? I mean, so thinking in different direction, that helps collectively. That's how a community grows. You know, I mean, a community of practitioners grow from such interaction. From that point of view, I think this panel has been very great. I mean, I'm really happy that I was here, happy that I was called, first of all, and then sure, it's a thing. You are asking about how do we improve. You know, I mean, if you are a kind of organization and you have a network, so perhaps if the network they have some questions, then that question can become the basis for panel discussion. If you know, when next time we have it also, so that it can start with certain ground. That's my suggestion.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Iqbal.
Yeah, no, I completely echo TV and Alex's sentiments. I've thoroughly enjoyed and learned so much from everyone on this panel. And I've also really, I have to say, the questions from the audience have also been very thought-provoking. And really, I think these are the questions that people like us in this space that's growing and that's trying to figure out a lot of things also. I think these questions help us chart this path. And no, I mean, I guess I feel like the topic is so broad, like filmmaking and science filmmaking is such a broad theme. And like Alex said, we can go on for a couple of more hours. So I guess maybe maybe we could focus a bit more on, say, a few aspects of filmmaking, science filmmaking. But no, maybe not, because I think if we did focus on a few aspects, then we would have missed out on various other things that the panelists brought up and the audience brought up. And I think, so that's why I think it was perfect. I have no suggestions to give you really, and just would like to thank you for inviting me, really.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iqbal. Mr. Kannadi, your feedback and suggestions.
Yeah, it was actually great where we have people who are like TVV as well as all different age groups. It was so nice. I mean, we have worked with the TVV. We have conducted regular workshops. It was so amazing, and I can have another 2 and 3 people in the same team. I'm so happy to be part of it, and I'm wishing all to see more and show more.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kannadi. We would definitely try to improve and take up your suggestions in the upcoming workshops and sessions. I would again like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Dainis, Dr. TVV, Dr. Iqbal, and Mr. Kannadi for taking out their valuable time from their schedules. I'd also like to thank our mentor, Dr. Anil Kumar Challa, for the guidance. We just completed 1 year of this initiative, the Dancing Neuron, today.
Yeah,
so thank you so much for the guidance, sir. And I'd also like to thank Nupur for all the technical support behind the scene. And of course, our lovely audience who made this possible. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Srushti, you also
Take care,
did a great
everyone.
job.
Yeah, great job of moderation. Bye. Take care, everyone.
Thank
Okay,
you so
take care.
much. Thank you.